Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to unpack some absolutely fascinating and honestly pretty provocative philosophies from author Xu Feng. We're looking at two of his essays today, written a few years apart, that both essentially aim to do one big thing: completely challenge our conventional logic and totally redefine modern hustle culture. If you've ever felt like traditional ways of thinking, or even the whole concept of just trying really hard, kind of don't add up, well, you are going to find this breakdown incredibly compelling. So let me hook you right out of the gate with this seemingly impossible physical puzzle. Can you put your shoes on before your socks? This is actually the fifth item Xu Feng brings up in his 2022 article on unconventional thinking. Now, from a strictly traditional physical standpoint, trying to do this sounds like a riddle you'd give a toddler, right? It seems literally impossible. But he uses this specific, frustrating little mental trap to perfectly demonstrate the limits of conventional thinking.
Which brings us to Section 1, Shoes Before Socks.
Now, obviously, attempting that reverse order of getting dressed using traditional logic is just physically absurd. You can't comfortably stretch a normal sock over a giant shoe. But here is Xu Feng's solution: unconventional thinking. He defines this as breaking familiar cognitive boundaries to unlock apparent solutions to seemingly impossible or unsolvable challenges. See, he points out that we get stuck simply because we refuse to break the rules of the puzzle. He believes that once we actually embrace unconventional approaches, once we stop trying to force the literal sock over the literal shoe and think outside that boundary, brand new solutions become incredibly apparent.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. The 64 possibilities. Xu Feng doesn't just keep this theory confined to the micro level of getting dressed in the morning. He scales this whole idea way up to macro-level societal structures. He highlights these super rigid binaries we just normally accept without a second thought. Take the economic divide of capitalism versus socialism. Does human survival really have to be limited to just those two specific poles? Must it be one or the other? He does the same thing with human relationships, asking if we really want to be confined to just acquaintances and strangers, or rich and poor, or relatives and foes.
And this brilliantly illustrates his core theory. Xu Feng argues that every single phenomenon shouldn't be trapped in a simple this or that binary, but should actually be considered within a realm of exactly 64 possibilities. He uses this specific number to represent this vast, entirely untapped spectrum of choices that we just completely ignore, all because we're so stubbornly locked into our traditional pairs of opposites.
To really detail this specific argument, he looks at geopolitics, specifically China-US relations. Now, we normally hear that these two nations must vacillate between either cooperation or confrontation. But Xu Feng argues that limiting our worldview to those familiar boundaries is exactly what renders these massive problems unsolvable. By his logic, there are 62 other potential approaches in this dynamic that are being entirely ignored. It's a prime example of the kind of untapped potential we could unlock with unconventional thinking.
All right, moving right along to Section 3, the linguistics of labor.
Transitioning over to an article he wrote in 2025, having established this framework for breaking boundaries, Xu Feng actually pivots inward. He starts deconstructing deeply personal concepts by examining the very etymology of Chinese characters. He outlines his belief that Chinese culture is a divine heritage, arguing that deep, foundational truths are actually hidden in the structure of the characters themselves. For example, look at the character for marriage. It's composed of the character for woman right next to the character for clouded judgment. In his analysis, this implies that a woman enters into marriage with clouded judgment.
And he follows that up with another really interesting character analysis. The character for good combines woman and man. Xu Feng notes that this symbolizes a harmonious union. But when he places these two concepts side by side, he's raising a profound philosophical question. If the union of man and woman is inherently good, but marriage implies clouded judgment, then what is the true nature of marriage itself? It suggests that true goodness doesn't strictly have to come from the institutional boundary of marriage.
This leads us right into Section 4, the illusion of effort.
Now, what's really interesting here is that this brings us to his most radical critique yet. Think about our modern world for a second. Parents, teachers, and those incredibly popular success philosophies, like Napoleon Hill's, they constantly push us to simply make an effort. We're basically told that trying hard is the ultimate virtue. Well, Xu Feng completely rejects our modern hustle culture by breaking down the Chinese character for effort. It consists of the character for slave on top and strength on the bottom. Literally, it translates to a slave strength. Xu argues that this character is actually a subtle warning to the intelligent to not exert effort, suggesting that this kind of toil is meant only for the foolish.
I absolutely have to share this powerful quote straight from the source text, just to really impartially frame his stance here. If effort is the labor of a slave, then the harder one tries, the deeper one sinks into slavery. See, Xu defines effort as an entirely external force. To him, it's society compelling people to suppress their own innate nature to just toil away, whether that's studying, working, or networking, just to achieve an external goal, even if they are entirely unwilling.
So, let's wrap this up in Section 5, Passion over Pressure. So, the crucial point is, if effort is a trap, what's the solution? Well, the author pivots from deconstructing the negativity of effort to offering his clear alternative, innate passion and intrinsic motivation. Just consider these two extremes for a second. On one hand, a young person hooked on an internet game for 10 hours straight without blinking, let alone eating or sleeping. On the other hand, an Everest mountaineer enduring extreme, freezing hardship and literal life-threatening risks. According to Xu, neither of these extremes involves true effort. Why? Because both of these individuals are entirely driven by their own passion and enthusiasm. Absolutely no one is forcing them to be there.
He explains his view that without natural talent and intrinsic motivation, forced effort is completely meaningless. Actually, scratch that. It makes the outcome worse. Think of a sheep training rigorously to fight a wolf. That's totally useless, right? Or imagine if tech billionaire Jack Ma had been forced to devote his entire life to becoming an NBA basketball star. The forced effort wouldn't have magically led to success. It would have just been a total waste of energy and, frankly, a very short basketball career.
He summarizes this with a really striking metaphor. If a rooster spends his life trying to fly, will it ever outsoar an eagle? This just beautifully anchors his argument. You simply cannot overcome your innate nature by sheer slave-like toil. True achievement, he argues, only comes from perfectly aligning what you do with what you naturally are.
And the author actually uses his own incredibly busy life as an example to prove this. He manages a whole vacation resort and writes almost every single day. Now, some people might look at that schedule and say he is making a massive effort. But Xu argues he doesn't use effort at all. He does all of it willingly because he genuinely finds it enjoyable, interesting, and fun. It's not effort for him, it's passion. Which brings us to the end of today's breakdown, and I want to leave you with this one final, truly provocative question based on Xu philosophy to help you reevaluate your own daily routine. Are you exerting the effort of a slave or following your passion? It's just such a fascinating lens to examine your own daily motivations, the boundaries you accept, and exactly where you are spending your energy. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.